The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
The invasion of Ukraine is the latest part in a war that was started in 2014. This is the world's first great information war, and we're already 8 years in. Britain's problem has been the Tory party. Boris Johnson refused to acknowledge that we are or have been at war, which seems strange considering at the moment Britain needs to be unified, and there's nothing like having an enemy to unify the country. It is also in part because nearly the entire party is taking Russian money. Why bite the hand that feeds you? It would also call into question every election since 2014. You might ask why, and it's a good question. It was Putin's fury at the removal of the Ukrainian President Yanukovych in February 2014 that kicked everything off. Putin wanted his man in charge, and in retaliation he began a plan to use bribery, social media and hacking to gain influence over the Ukraine. And in order to ensure victory, it was in his interest to destabilise the West so they would be less likely to be involved in supporting the Ukraine in case he had to invade. I'll even make a prediction, although looking unlikely, if Russia was to succeed in taking over the Ukraine, I will make a bet that Yanukovych would be put in place as president once more. The start. 2014, a new form of warfare or hybrid warfare begins. The Soviets had practiced disinformation for years during the Cold War and were considered one of the best at it. Putin had discovered a golden Willy Wonka ticket to manipulate hearts and minds, and it was almost completely invisible. What they now had was social media and hacking. Social media is a great disinformation device that could not only hoover up information about you, which you provide, but could also be used to push, nudge and convince people of new truths and fears. Even in the 1500s, people like Niccolo Machiavelli, in his book The Prince, realised that fear was an excellent tool. It is much safer to be feared than loved. Fear preserves you by a dread of punishment which never fails. We now know Russia began its information war in February 2014. Information operations were first to be used in the invasion of Crimea and Donbass, a deliberate attempt to warp reality to confuse both Ukrainians and the world. This was not to just be about Ukraine, it was against the West specifically, America and Britain. How do we know this? Because the FBI investigated. The Mueller Report, which detailed how various groups influenced elections. The Russian military bested the attempts at Watergate. Watergate was an attempt by fellow Americans to bug the officers of the Democratic office to find out what they were thinking and doing. The Russian military hacked into the Democratic Party computers, stole as much information as possible, and passed that information on to people including Julian Assange, who used carriers and USB sticks to give the information to the Trump campaign. It proved beyond any doubt that Russia attacked the US. And later it was shown from the UK-Russia report that Putin had attacked the Scottish referendum in 2014, something we'll talk about later. Not only was information passed to the Trump campaign, Russia attacked the 2016 US election via tech platforms, especially Facebook. Due to the previous operations by 2016, the attacks were now refined and entirely invisible. Russia and other bad actors acted with impunity, and in some cases alignment, such as WikiLeaks. Companies such as Cambridge Analytica, Manafort and Cummings all learned how to exploit a platform that was totally open. Unfortunately, no one could see how. However, through sheer bloody hard work of academics, journalists and the FBI, we do know. But because the information was complex, the Tories and various media groups in the US and UK did not understand the information, or it was brushed under the carpet. In Britain, it was called meddling by some, influenced by others. Some denied that it had taken place at all. Yet, there is an important point. NATO in its articles considers cyber warfare, this type of cyber warfare, a form of attack and therefore a declaration of war. This failure is at the heart of what is happening now in Ukraine, because the first offensive in the Great Information War was from 2014 to 2022. President Putin won, and he won by convincing us it wasn't even a war.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Comments could be heard, it's just ads, they don't work anyhow, and a bot didn't tell me how to vote. Yet we can see from news reports, investigations and academic research that Facebook can affect us. Fears were broadcast, fear of immigration, fear of the EU, Machiavelli to Hitler have all seen the effects of fear, and they all knew we are fear-seeking. Channel 4 showed the deep effects of the US election and how Cambridge Analytica had targeted minority groups during the Trump election. Cambridge Analytica would use the information you put on Facebook to create a profile of you. They could then target you with adverts, providing false facts to put people off from voting. The effect was huge in the Trump election. This is also known as disenfranchisement, something normally associated with the KKK or other extreme right-wing organisations. However, instead of using a hammer, this group had found a surgical knife so fine you wouldn't even know you'd been cut. The ads would find people who were likely on the edge of voting and then target them with ad after ad after ad. Even Hitler knew that if you said something 3 times, it became a fact in many eyes, something Donald Trump does regularly.
I'd give you 19 or 20 names for that, right? It's got all different names. Wuhan. Wuhan was catching on. Kung flu, yeah. Kung flu. Some people call it the Chinese flu, the China flu, right? They call it the China as opposed to the China.
Facebook is still an open threat. It is exploited by authoritarians across the globe. It's not a physical war, it's an information war, and it's across the globe. 2019. Meanwhile, in Britain, Conservatives did not want people looking into interference. 17th of October, Boris Johnson received the UK Russia Report. In November, Boris Johnson denied that any interference had taken place.
Absolutely no evidence that I've ever seen of any Russian interference in UK democratic processes.
22nd of November, Boris Johnson also denies any attacks on UK democracy.
Whether or not there was Russian interference or any kind of influence.
There is absolutely no evidence that I know
that's the case, then why not release it?
To show any interference in any British electoral event. And the
day after general election, Boris Johnson agrees to release the Russia report. By June 2020, the report still had not been released. This prompted a group of 30 MPs from different parties to demand the report be published. The report was published on the 21st of July 2020. It showed that interference had taken place in 2014. It showed interference was likely in 2016, but the government had refused to investigate. As we do not know whether Putin interfered because the government won't investigate, let's play a game. I'm going to be Putin, and I decided I wanted to support Brexit. It's to my advantage. It splits Europe. It removes from the EU one of its biggest players. It causes economic damage to Britain and Europe, and increases tension, especially between Britain and Ireland, and Britain and France, as well as Britain and the EU.
But what's important is that we respond firmly to threats, and we've heard disproportionate threats from Paris, and now with a potential blockade.
I'm going to base this attack on the Mueller Report. In the previous decade, plans had already been set in place by Putin encouraging supporters to move to the UK and gain citizenship. I've detailed this in another video, link in the description. And I want to say a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters and everyone who's bought me a coffee, because it really does keep this channel growing and moving. 1. He would ask his agents to donate to Brexit parties or groups that were aligned to Brexit, directly or indirectly, and to find loopholes in British law that allowed anonymous donations. 2. To use his military operations to hack into opposition party emails and computers and then send that information to groups supporting Brexit. 3. To find dirt on candidates wanting to remain and use it against them. 4. To set up think tanks to advise groups he wanted to succeed. 5. To use Russians based in Britain to use their British companies, media, and to buy advertising on Facebook and target voters who are not sure on how to vote. The think tanks could then suggest companies with intimate knowledge on how to use Facebook, similar to the Russian military, and hire them to support Brexit and to fire out advertising that would put off voters or sway voters who were not sure which way to vote. 5. Set up TV channels to promote Brexit and views similar to that of Russia or Vladimir Putin. You can see this in more detail in my video From Russia with No Love, link at the end of this video. Unfortunately, we don't know what's been going on, and all I can give you is supposed ideas that came from the Mueller Report and what Russia did in the US. We don't know because investigations have never been started, and MI5 and the police refuse to investigate unless directed by government. In America, the institutions of government worked, in spite of Trump. The authorities investigated. Individuals were indicated, charged, and jailed. The hostile actions of a foreign state examined and unpicked. 2022. We're still seeing the effects of Putin being allowed to finance political parties. In February, Britain has claimed that 100 Russian oligarchs and businesses have been suspended. When the BBC approached the government for a list of these 100 entities, as the government called it, the government only gave 10 names. RT was finally banned from UK airwaves after 11 days, and a defence from the Prime Minister.
And we live in a country that believes in free speech. And I think it's important that we should leave it up to Ofcom rather than to politicians to decide which media organisations to ban.
It's interesting to think that if this was World War II, would Nazi radio and television be allowed to broadcast within the UK? I guess it still comes back to that saying, don't bite the hand that feeds you. If you're still not sure about this, in PMQs on February 2nd, 2022, it transpired that Boris Johnson was allowing these oligarchs 18 months in which to get themselves out of the UK before their assets were seized. In fact, in that PMQ's Prime Minister's Question Time, MPs were so concerned that MPs from both sides of the House were asking questions about why Russian oligarchs hadn't been investigated and hadn't had their assets seized. What's been happening between Russia and Britain wasn't just ads, it's war. And it's crucial that we understand that Putin's attack on the Ukraine and the West was a joint and coordinated attack. And this new front, the invasion of the Ukraine, is not just about the Ukraine. We, Britain and the West, are part of that plan. We've always been part of that plan. The Ukrainians are not just fighting for Ukraine, they are fighting for us. The key to helping is to understand that Putin isn't just coming for us next. He has already done that. If you enjoyed this, then you should check out my other films, including From Russia with No Love, available in the description.